A lot of these people get the badge before they get the toolkit. Everybody's worked for a really good boss, hopefully, and everybody can probably more easily name a really bad boss that they've worked for. What's the difference?
Meet Martin le Comte, company owner of MLCspeaks and co-author of the best-selling practical guide, The 10 Golden Rules of Leadership. With over 30 years of experience in leading teams from HSBC and Barclays to VP Learning Design and Delivery at NatWest Commercial and Institutional and former delivery manager at NatWest Group, he's on a mission to help leaders turn vision into real action and results.
It's better to be interested than interesting. When something goes wrong, they look in the mirror for somebody to talk to. And when something goes right, they look out of the window for somebody to reward.
So do you think when you started as a customer services person in a branch at the Midland Bank that you felt you had leadership qualities in you? Or is it something that you've acquired along the journey?
I think
Martin, welcome to The Power Between.
Thanks very much indeed for inviting me on, Roddy. Pleasure to be here.
No, it's great. We don't know each other terribly well, but I've heard lots about you from various people. You've got a sort of rich background in the banking and consulting worlds, having held sort of big roles in RBS, now NatWest, and Barclays too. And very much the focus around sort of, well, I think time spent in high pressure trading environments, but also doing transformation projects. So right in the mix of all that goes on in these big organizations. Tell me in your own words, how you came to be doing that, where it started and where you are now.
That's a great question. If you speak to a lot of my older friends, Roddy, they're still shocked. So I don't come from a financial services background per se. I kind of fell into it. So I was in between other things, let's just say, back in the mid-90s. And I was at a loose end for 3 or 4 months. So I applied for a job as a customer service representative, Midland Bank Customer Services in Leeds. I didn't know what I was doing, but because I'd done some work with young people in the theatrical world, they invited me to apply for a job as a team leader. Having never worked in financial services, didn't know anything about banking, joined, loved it, ended up staying at HSBC in a variety of different roles. 13 years before I was kind of approached by Barclays through a contact, through a friend. And just, I guess in my last few years at HSBC, got very involved in leadership development, ran some of their global leadership development programs. And it's just always an area that's fascinated me. And my career's kind of taken me from there. So from Barclays, asset and sales financing, one of the best corporate roles I've ever had, with a brilliant exec team that trusted me and let me get on with it, changed my role, into the consulting world with a small learning and development company, to starting my own business with the wonderful Elizabeth Fox 10 Development for nearly 10 years before joining Nick Caesar at NatWest Markets to look after their leadership agenda, and then transferring into group before doing what I'm doing now, which is running my own keynote speaking business, leadership development, and writing my second book. It's not dull.
Well, we will touch on that, shall we? But that's I mean, in some ways, that's a sort of clear journey, isn't it? Once you are into the financial services, and it's funny that a lot of these people I've been speaking with, having these conversations with, have a sort of theatrical kickoff point. And I suppose that shows in a number of things, but one, you're interested in people and working with people and having people around you rather than necessarily the technical reason for going into those bigger organizations. But also there's a bit of performance in there, presumably, isn't it? Is that an appealing part? Now you're a keynote speaker, so there's a bit of performance in that too.
Yeah, there's absolutely a bit of performance in keynote speaking. I guess there's a bit around being able to hold an audience for an hour is something, from my performance background, is something that I love. And I don't want to call it entertaining, but I do try and make it accessible for people, but real. So I tend to focus less on the theory, because that's not my background, but the practical applications, things that people can pick up and do the next day. That's what I try and focus on more than anything else.
And that's key, isn't it? I mean, I mean, I'm a big fan of Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. We go into training and we get given frameworks and we get given theories, and they all make sense, and they're quite exciting to sort of explore and understand. And you walk out, and 4 hours later, you've forgotten 50% of it. 4 days later, you've forgotten the next 20%, and 4 weeks later, you're holding on to 5% of it if you're lucky. But stories and the things that emotionally engage you, they're the ones that you retain, and also that repetition, coming back to things regularly. So that learning on the job really works, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, there's lots of conversation about the power of storytelling with my leadership hat on. I can't begin to describe how powerful it is. Some of the best leaders that I've ever worked with, some of the best speakers that I've ever heard, they have that storytelling ability that draws you in and makes it believable and makes it resonate and makes it feel achievable almost. And it's a skill like any other that can be learned and developed. I always have this big thing about, and my colleague Ben and I were talking about it the other day, are leaders born or made? And there used to be that thing where, oh, yeah, you're just born a leader. It's not true. There are certain things that we're good at and certain things but it's a set of skills that I can develop and hone and practice them, just like you say, until they become habit, just like I've learned all the other habits in my life.
Which opens up the whole conversation really about what it is that makes a good leader. And on one side, and perhaps the side that traditionally made us think, or made people think, the world think, that leaders were born rather than made, it's having that sort of charisma, being the great man theory, which is pretty widely dismissed these days, although there are moments when it can come to life. But in fact, good leadership these days is seen as being something very different to that, isn't it? And it's being much more aware of context and able to adapt teams and create. Our definition here at Ideas for Leaders is someone who creates the conditions for others to do their best work, and that doesn't take that sort of always being in the spotlight type of approach. So do you think when you started as a customer services person that in a branch at the Midland Bank, that you felt you had leadership qualities in you, or is it something that you've acquired along the journey?
I think, Roddy, it's a mix of both. So and I was more in the customer service center part of it. So the branch stuff actually scared me a little bit. It was almost too close. So I liked being on the end of a telephone. So maybe that, but my performance background absolutely helped with some of that stuff. But I actually started my career, as many people of my age did. I worked in McDonald's for 2 years while I was at college and stuff like that. And it was the most amazing start that you could have. Now, it's much more about management than about leadership. So everything had a process, and they were famous for everything has the way of doing it. And it was the McDonald's way. But it taught you some of that discipline. But then the managers that were really good, and when I started developing into a manager there myself, it was the people that could, this sounds a bit highfalutin, but inspire the people and make them feel like they wanted to be there and give a really good service. And they were always the top performing stores. They were always the top performing managers that you used to get, get sent to different stores to make those stores work. And I've always, liked to badge myself as a people person. And a phrase that, Ben and I love to use, it's better to be interested than interesting. So rather than telling people about what I do and how I do it, be really interested in them. What drives them? What motivates them? What gets them out of bed in the morning? What do they love about their job? What really hacks them off? And how can I, and just what you said, how can I flex my approach to meet their needs rather than just my needs?
Yeah, no, I think there's lots there. I'm keen to unpack that. It reminds me of that story, which is presumably apocryphal, but I don't know, Queen Victoria, who had two big the big beast prime ministers during her reign were Gladstone and Disraeli, and I'm going to get this the wrong way around, but I think it was her saying when she had dinner with Mr. Gladstone, he made her think that he was the most interesting person on the planet, and when he had dinner with Mr. Disraeli, he made her feel that she was the most interesting person on the planet, and there was no doubt which one she preferred. And it's that ability to create that sense of energy and value in others. And I think that plays exactly. And I wonder how many analogies there have been between Queen Victoria and people working in McDonald's. But McDonald's is well known for those tight processes that are replicated in every store, and on the basis that they are more or less efficiently done in every store should do more or less the same. But as you say, they don't, and the difference is the ability of the managers to energize, motivate, and create purpose and meaning of the people.
Yeah, but I've seen that replicated so often in business, Roddy. So and I talk a lot about hats. So am I wearing the management hat? Am I wearing the leadership hat? The what when I'm wearing the leadership hat is pretty set in stone, but the how somebody does it, that's the difference maker. So, I talk about 3 things that a leader has to have: courage, flexibility, and humility. Now, in equal measure, but using those right things at the right time, that's the thing that's going to motivate, inspire, and develop the people that you lead, not the what. Because the what anyone can do, and potentially 5 years down the line, AI will do the what. But, Buzz, my tagline is because people matter. So it's the human element of that just makes the difference. Everybody's worked for a really good boss, hopefully, and everybody can probably more easily name a really bad boss that they've worked for. What's the difference? It's the how they felt, how they were treated, how motivated and engaged were they? And it's those little things that it's almost, you can't read in a manual, but you have to experience, but you have to find out how to use that tool.
And practice. Yeah. So, there are 2 things there, aren't there? There's the practicing part, but there's also the role modeling from your bosses or your leaders. They don't need to be bosses either. They could almost be, your reports, people underneath you, and you see how they behave, that they act, which I suppose takes us perfectly to this, our focus here at the Power Between around people in the middle of organizations, because they absolutely have that challenge, don't they? And it's not about designing strategy. It's not about the big glamorous decisions that sort of make the headlines. It's about the small condition creating decisions and actions and behaviors they need to do, which shifts, the power and the success of a team or a department doing okay to doing excellent. So, what do you see as some of those major challenges that they call them the frozen middle, but we like to call them. Someone said the other day, and I'm going to start using it, the magnificent middle, because they've these powers, in fact, but they've got to find ways to use them.
Yeah, the first 2 big things that pop into my head about the magnificent middle or the frozen middle, or however you want to term them, and I think I was absolutely one of these, is a lot of these people get the badge before they get the toolkit. So they're promoted into leadership positions primarily because they're really good at the task or activity. So, for example, Frank, you're really good at sales. Now you're going to be the sales manager. When fundamentally those roles are different. So, when Frank was in sales, 90% of his time would be doing the task. I just need to be really great at sales. Now, leading and managing a team in sales, that dynamic changes. So I need to manage the process. So I need to make sure the what is done correctly. I need to probably have some task responsibilities still, but then I need to lead, motivate, inspire another group of people with no skills. And I think lots of organizations underestimate what that skill is. So you're left with a group of people trying to do something and not knowing how to do it. So they just revert back to what they know. So they're really good at the task. And then they can't understand why the people that they are leading and managing are demotivated. So that's probably the biggest thing that I see across my 35 years of working in lots of different organizations, both internally and externally. And the second one, and this is stealing a phrase from a friend of mine from many years ago, and I'll name check him, Lawrence White. I remember this. He said this to me about 20 years ago, and he was in my team at the time. He said, Martin, just remember, what gets measured gets done. So what gets measured? In an organization, what are the leadership metrics? Are they, and this is what I typically see, for example, you need to do a performance review with every one of your team. The question that gets asked is, have you done your performance review? And the answer is yes. That is a management process. Have you done it? The quality of those performance reviews, that's the how. So what did you find out? What's Martin's aspirations? Where does Frank want to go? Why does he do that? What really, that's the stuff that needs to get measured. And there's almost, I've seen it done really well in a couple of organizations where they focus on the how, and the level of retention is higher, the level of discretionary effort is higher, the internal promotions are higher, but it almost requires quite a mindset shift from both the organization and the individual about what am I needing to focus on.
Just to show how coherent what you say is, I mean, that's people being interested rather than interesting too, isn't it? It all fits together. Yeah, I mean, it is becoming, I mean, what's striking about doing these conversations is, that idea that people get promoted for their expertise rather than their leadership skills, it just does keep recurring. And because it seems when someone puts, shines the spotlight on it, it seems fairly obvious that if you're good at sales, that doesn't necessarily mean, which is essentially a competitive sport. Frank will be judging himself not so much by how much he's sold in the week, but how much he's sold compared to his two other colleagues or whatever. And it is a competitive game, and you want to be winning it. Whereas leadership is not a zero-sum game. It's about raising everyone together. So they're fundamentally different.
The phrase that I use, Roddy, is just because I can drive a car doesn't mean I can fly a plane.
Exactly.
Now, there are some transferable skills, but they are fundamentally different activities. And it's one of the things that Ben and I say to leaders all the time is, wait a minute, just, we do a lot of work in education. Just because you are a brilliant classroom teacher, now you have to utilize some of those skills as a classroom teacher to help others almost be better than you at that classroom teaching bit, and take yourself out of the spotlight and shine the spotlight on somebody else. Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, I'm sure you've read it, and if people haven't, it's a great book. He talks about level 5 leaders, and I love this. And he says, level 5 leaders, when something goes wrong, they look in the mirror for somebody to talk to. And when something goes right, they look out of the window for somebody to reward. And I love that.
Yeah,
And
that's great.
it's just such a beautiful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and clearly it's not the sort of natural human instinct. You have to teach yourself to think that.
Humility is the third one. Humility. What am I doing? So, my two favorite questions in a one-to-one after doing all of the performance stuff and how are we doing, how are you getting on? My two favorite questions is, so what's the one thing that I do that really works for you and why? So I can get a bit of data and understand it. And then the challenging question, and this is all about how do I build a relationship with people? What's the one thing that I do that doesn't work for you and why? Help me out. Give me an example. And traditionally, especially if you're building that relationship with your people struggle with that individually, initially. So you might need to help them and go, well, I'm working on this, or I've had this, but you get such a massive insight into, actually, there are some things that I'm doing that with the best intentions are not working for that person. And that just helps me with my flexibility bit about, right, how do I lead my people better? There was one lady once I used to take my team out for, and people that know me will know this example because I've used it because it was just so big for me. I used to take my team out for a one-to-one, take them out for coffee out of the building. And we used to go to, local coffee shops, Starbucks, Costa, all those things. And I used to buy the coffees and I sit down. And most of my team loved it. One lady came out because I asked her to, and she was really uncomfortable until one day she said, "Can we have our one-to-one in the office? I've booked a room." I genuinely thought she was going to hand in a notice. We had the best one-to-one ever, and I said to her, "Wow, that was a brilliant one-to-one. I was really worried." And she said to me, "Martin, I've got to tell you, I hate going out of the office. I live quite locally and I don't want people to see me chatting with my boss. It makes me feel really uncomfortable." What a bit of insight. So I was doing it because I liked it and I was getting some good reactions, but it's that flexibility bit. Everybody's different. How do I adapt my style to meet the needs of the person that I'm leading?
Yeah, so much of it is trying to get a glimpse of other people's perspectives. Yeah, you're normally, I mean, the approach you took of taking people out, normally it was sort of neutral territory, that you were, the power dynamic was reduced to an extent. But what you, yeah, perfectly reasonably hadn't grasped is there was a whole other dynamic in there too.
But I hadn't even thought to ask. I just made the assumption, and it was it was an easy mistake to make, but I was unintentionally not helping that person to succeed because they wouldn't talk to me about the things. So it was a brilliant learn for me. So I always ask, "Where do you want to do it?" It's such a simple question, but it's so much, it goes back to, it's just a tiny way of demonstrating being interested rather than interesting. And all of those things build bonds.
And that bit about creating the conditions for people to do their best work, you had inadvertently not created the best conditions for that. No, it's a brilliant example, and it's a really important example because on one level it's such a trivial thing, and yet it sets a tone for all sorts of other stuff, and if you get that kind of thing consistently right, other stuff flows from it, which I think is the fundamental lesson that we get about this. Is it's not big grandiose sort of changes of whatever, of the totally rearranging the furniture. It's yeah it's those little understandings of how people operate that create psychological safety for them, but also reward and all the other motivators.
One of the golden rules, one of the 10 golden rules of leadership, is treat people as they need to be treated. And that's very different to how they want to be treated, or it's very different how to treat people as you'd like to be treated yourself. But that with my leadership hat on, my job is to give them the best that I possibly can, even if sometimes they don't really want it. So that's, you have to be challenging sometimes, but actually it's doing the right thing for that person at the right time. And I'm human and we're all human, so we don't always get it right. But when we get it wrong, they also need to be able to feel comfortable to tell you so that you can change it.
But I mean, this raises the question. We ran a sort of conference day on this years ago, and it's just come back to me. But the question was, do you need to be a psychologist to be a good leader? And the answer was generally no, but you've got to be open to understanding some of these dynamics. That you don't need to be a deep expert in it. I mean, what's your experience, I suppose, through the years of how that's changed, and also, in some of these, the trading floor at a large investment bank is a classically hard-nosed, aggressive, sort of competitive place. How did you see people operate in that environment compared to others you've been in?
Not as fundamentally different as people would like you to think.
As Hollywood
Honestly,
would suggest.
honestly, I remember walking into the investment bank, and on my, I think it was my second day, a facilitator from the central bank was off sick, so they were going to cancel the course, and I'd kind of half written it as an external. So I said to Nick, my boss, "I'll go and run it." And he was like, "That's not your plan for your second day." And I was like, "Well, you're going to cancel the course for 14 people that are time poor. I'll go and do it." And he said, "Okay, cool," which was a brilliant leadership thing. Trusted me, let me go and do it. At about 1 o'clock on that day, one of the traders came up to me and said, "It's so nice to work with somebody that really understands investment banking." And I had to laugh because I didn't know anything about investment banking. And still, I wouldn't say my knowledge is that great, but it's almost like understanding and listening to their circumstances. The people they're dealing with are still people. And they still have to challenge that courage, flexibility, and humility. And maybe some of that. And I was talking to an ex-investment banker who's now a coach the other day, and he was like, one of the things that used to frustrate me is that almost toxic masculinity of getting stuff done. But I still see that in other areas. That probably the only other area that I don't see it ever really is when Ben and I are working in education. But in every other industry, it's there. It's probably not as pronounced, but it's there. But it's still the same challenges, people always talk about, especially investment banking, money is the motivator. We all know it isn't. It's a hygiene factor because that bonus lasts for the amount of time I get it and what I spend it on, and then it's gone. How do you retain that talent until a point when it's time for them to leave and move on and do something else? But how do you retain that talent and keep them motivated, developed, inspired, and engaged? That's leadership. And not just in investment banking, but in education, in financial services per se, in retail, those challenges still remain.
So how did you sort of maintain those behaviors and develop those behaviors in these organizations? I mean, because these are time scarce. People need to make their money, and time out of the office, off the trading floor is has a cost to it.
Yes, it does. And it's the how do you demonstrate that return on investment?
Yeah.
So, one of the things, it's kind of where the 10 golden rules of leadership came from. So the whole ethos of the 10 golden rules of leadership were, here are 10 things that leaders can do to make a difference to the bottom line. And when things like employee engagement scores go up, return on investment goes up, sales goes up, that doesn't happen by accident. There's a series of things that you can do as a leader to make that happen. And, I created the 10 golden rules with Elizabeth Fox because both of us, we had the badge without the toolkit, and the 10 golden rules kind of talk about all the mistakes we made as a leader or lessons that we've learned to avoid other people falling into the same traps as we did. But it's really interesting, and everything that Ben and I now do, we follow up with our clients. They can tell you the difference almost straight away. So the last thing we did when I was working for NatWest was introduce a new feedback tool, model, and program together with the design and the leadership curriculum team. It was a tool that I'd been using for 20 years. What they noticed in the next 12 months is the level of unsolicited feedback that had been recorded had massively increased. And it changed in terms of some of the employee engagement scores. And it was the most highly requested non-mandated course in the bank's history.
Amazing.
So, and that was a real team effort. But it just goes to show you that, I have a phrase, I nick a phrase from the Field of Dreams. It's not about if you build it, they will come. If you build it and create that need and desire, then they'll come. And if they can see it working quite quickly, that's more likely to get them to want to practice it until it becomes a habit. And then when it becomes a habit, it becomes part of your culture. But that's the leadership bit about having the courage sometimes to keep going when it's hard, because it's not easy from day one. I can walk out of a course and go, oh, that was brilliant. That was great. I'm going to do this, and this. That's not real. That's not real, because the emails are there for the next day. So, what we always talk about, what's the one or two things, no more than 3, that you're going to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to measure it? How will you know you've achieved it? That's the challenge. So it's almost, we often say when we're running sessions, or even when I'm doing keynote talks, it's the work starts afterwards. Here's just the insight. I want to get, Ben and I want to get you motivated and engaged to want to go and do it. Here's a bit of a framework to use, but
You're the fire lighter to get the fire started, but But you've got to feed it.
Yeah, we always use the analogy of driving a car, right? Learning to drive. That first lesson, you're really excited. You can't wait to do it. You know, when I think about my dad, he could drive. He was old, a bit thick. I'll be brilliant at this. By lesson 3, I was going, this is impossible. There are 3 pedals. I've got 2 feet. This cannot be done. Without the right driving instructor, stroke leader, I probably would have given up, but he didn't let me. He didn't let me give up. He gave me all the reassurance. He really taught me how to do it, told me that this was a stage that everyone was going to go through, and got me to the point where now I drive without thinking about it. It's a habit. But the leadership bit is that how do I take that level of motivation and commitment and increase the competence and vary my style and approach to get that person to the point where I'm no longer required again, which is one of the 10 golden rules. And it's almost the joy, the leadership joy for me is when you see somebody and you're like going, they thought that was impossible and now they're just doing it. And it's habit.
No, I really like that. And the car analogy is great because yes, you think this is easy, we can do this. And then as you say, the complexity of it, particularly if you're learning to drive in a manual car. I've now got my children through that. So, but yeah, that becomes baffling. And then, as you say, the habit comes. We don't think about changing gear and releasing the clutch and whatever. But there's still a level of intentionality about it. And I think being intentional in your leadership is so you understand why you do it and you know that it's important to do it. And that I think sets apart good leaders from less good leaders. So some people might be doing the right things, but without understanding why they're doing them. And if you understand why you do them, then you can apply them differently.
Yeah. So, you know, we've talked about the what and the how, but almost underpinning all of that, absolutely what is the why. So why am I doing it? And sometimes the people that you lead, and I've had this quite recently, don't understand why. And in my head, I'll be honest, it was obvious. But if I haven't, you know, bit of Simon Sinek here, if I haven't explained the why to people, it's almost like, well, Martin's just doing it because he feels like it. No, I'm being really intentional about it. Why is Martin suddenly giving me all this responsibility? That's how many times have leaders said, but that's your job. No, it isn't. My job is to, you know, give it away so that you can progress and I can progress. It's almost, you know, that 10th golden rule of leadership is how do I develop my people to a point where I'm no longer required? And that might not be that's not developing one person to do everything that you do. That's developing a range of people so that those tasks and activities can be done. Now, that might include developing your successor, but that's not to the detriment of everybody else in your team.
Well, and there's also that important piece that you think when you're giving away power like that it weakens you, but in fact, it almost always strengthens you because people appreciate it, they recognize it. And unless they're slightly sociopathic, they're not going to undermine you with it. Or really quite sociopathic.
No.
Mind you, there are a few of those out there too.
Oh, yeah.
The
Everyone's different. And some people, you know, there are still some people, and I've had experience of this, that simply don't want to be led or managed. And in some organizations, they've been allowed to get away with it, and it's almost too late because they've had years and years of experience. That doesn't stop us trying as a leader. But I had a great bit of advice from my last boss who said, you know, focus your attention on the people that want it. Don't try too hard with the people that don't. And that was a real challenge for me because I was like, well, everybody wants this stuff. And actually, they don't. They just don't. And, you know, spending 40% of your time with 3 people or 2 people that don't want it and 60% of your time with 8 people that do, that's not the right equation. That's not the right percentage. And that, you know, 35 years in, still learning. So,
but I mean, that takes us back to that question of whether you should focus on your strengths or your weaknesses. And the answer is, as always, a bit of both, but probably more on your strengths than your weaknesses, because
Yes, as long as you are managing your strengths. So again, a bit of data that I got a couple of years ago when I was moaning about things that were happening was my boss said, Martin, you need to understand that some people will find you intimidating. And I was like, what? How? And then they proceeded to give me 5 things that I did that others could find intimidating. Now, in my head, they're strengths, but actually, great bit of data, there are occasions where I'm overplaying my strengths. And it's, that is that flexibility piece as well. Your strengths are brilliant if you don't use them to excess. So it's almost a balance of, right, so in my head, I've got strengths, I've got manageable skills, and I've got best avoided. And I need to balance that out. So, and people that know me will laugh at this, I'm never going to be brilliant at detailed planning. I can kind of do it, but it takes up all of my energy. But actually, what I can do is develop somebody, because I know the what, who's got a preference for that stuff, that can be brilliant at it, that can help and support me. Yeah. The strategic planning bit, it's not something that I had done in my first 15 years, but I developed it with some help from other people and I kind of enjoyed it. It's not something that comes naturally to me, but I can do it. And there's other things like storytelling, which I don't need to think about. Yeah. But I need to make sure that I'm using storytelling when it's appropriate and not just when I like it. So it's a real juggling act. And that's where some of that, who do I go to get that insight? How do I get that data for myself about what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing so well? And that's where, I use those 2 questions to really help me, even if sometimes I get some data that I don't like. It's still great data.
I love that bit about sort of managing your strength. I have written up on the side of my office wall here the 2 inscriptions that were on the the temple at Delphi, and which was Noti Siauton, which is know thyself, and the other one Meden Agan, which is nothing in excess. So and that bit you said about the strengths is so appropriate for both of those. You got to know yourself, but then don't overdo it.
And it's really interesting because now I'm working with a new business partner, Ben. I'm having to be more conscious of that because I've had to manage myself, but it's been a solo thing, especially when I'm keynote speaking. That's easy because people want you to perform and the storytelling is the thing. But I'm really conscious now that when Ben and I are in meetings together going, no, wait a minute, this isn't just all about you. This is about balance. And it's, I'm so passionate about all of this stuff. Sometimes I just need to stop. And it's been really interesting and a real challenge for me, but it's one of the golden rules. Sorry, I know quite a few of them. Stop it. It's not about you. It's a great way of just, and Ben's really good at like going, Martin, stop that. And it's, oh, hang on a minute. No one's ever told me that before in that context. I need to be aware of that. But, it's a continual thing. It's, I love the concept and theories behind emotional intelligence, and it is, self-management, self-awareness, know thyself. But it's easy to know yourself. Sometimes it's harder to manage yourself, and you need to do those 2 things in concert.
Yeah, and it takes discipline and effort, and that's the thing I always like to return to about this leadership is it's hard work. We tend to think of it as almost a prize you get for having been good at what you were doing, and then you sort of become the leader and life becomes better. But in fact, life becomes a lot harder work if you're doing it properly and you're always having to attend to other people's problems. If you don't have an interest in doing that, then it's going to be really exhausting.
Yeah. And lots of leaders, and I totally get this, say that it's lonely. So there's a massive thing that we try and do is bring these communities together, which are, it's brilliant. The Power of the Between is doing that as well, going, yeah, you know what? I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that feels this way. I'm not the only one that gets really tired and you often find is, and I think Nick said this in, in your session with him, is, your career makes sense in hindsight. And sometimes I have in my head, as a leader, you don't get recognized often until later.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes people don't recognize some of those difficult conversations that you've had were for their benefit, or some of the things that you pushed them to do were to help them, even though they didn't realize it at the time. And
Sometimes people have to battle through these issues themselves, but even if you've given them the the steer that they might have wanted, we've all been through that process of thinking we know best until we realise that in fact we were given perfectly good advice at the outset.
yeah, but the leadership thing is, if you don't give them that advice, it's unfair to judge them, because you're judging them without giving them the data. If you give them the data and they don't take it on, okay, fine. But don't give them the data once. Give them the same data 2 or 3 times. Okay, if they don't take it on, okay, well, I've done my best. But don't not give them data and judge them.
If they're not given those ingredients, then they can't be expected to. So the 10 golden rules came out almost 10 years ago, and you say there's another one in the works at the moment.
Yes, there's another one in the works. We're just about to finish draft 1, and it's about the topic that we are asked the most about, which is giving, and more importantly, from a leadership perspective, receiving feedback. So every organization has a framework or a methodology for doing it. It's written in nearly every single leadership role profile I've ever seen. But I'm still staggered by the amount of leaders that don't know how to.
But again, that falls into the issue around process and EQ, though, doesn't it? I mean, you can do the right steps, but you can still chew it up.
Yeah, and it should be outcome focused. So, the tool that we use focuses on how the brain works and how to structure it and how to make that feedback a data source and give people the direction they need to change it. But it's still, I think it's still the second most powerful tool I've ever come across. And Ben says for him, it's the most powerful. Situational Leadership 2 by Ken Blanchard was my number 1. That was a game changer for me. But it's such a powerful way to help develop your people. And that's just about giving them the data and then giving them the direction about what it is they need to do.
Well, what seems to be coming out frequently these days in the conversations we're having is the fact that it needs to be woven into the normal course of events rather than put aside for twice a year or once a quarter or whatever.
Yeah, how do I rather than making it a process activity, which is, and it's kind of woven into the quarter or the half year or the yearly because it's uncomfortable for people, so they only do it when they have to. Yeah, but how do I make it a people activity? So, those 2 one-to-one questions that I shared earlier, they're all about giving people the opportunity to give me feedback. And I will do that after a meeting. I will do that after, a session. I will do that with a client. And the one thing that I don't ever use is the F word itself. I'll never use, can you give me some feedback? Because it's going to, we think that's going to be the title of the moment, the F word, but that's automatically putting people's barriers up. We don't use it outside of work, so we shouldn't use it in work.
And do you always lead that one with the what went well first, and then the what don't you like?
Yeah, only because it's easier for people to do the affirmative stuff first, unless you have a brilliant relationship. And Ben and I talk about we talk about a ladder of trust. So there's 4 stages. If you have that relationship with people, so they're really happy to share their personal views, you don't even need to ask the questions because they'll just tell you. I don't ever ask Ben the questions anymore. And, I'm thinking about what you said earlier about, how you learn from your team. Worked with a brilliant lady called Christine, in my last corporate role. I never had to ask her. She'd just go, Martin, when you did that, you did this. I'm like, oh no, did I? She's like, yeah. What you need to do is this. I'm like, yeah, right, brilliant. I never thought of that as feedback. That was just Christine helping me. Even though she was a direct report of mine, that didn't matter. And it's how do I, again, one of those things, with my leadership hat on, how do I build that confidence and capability within the team?
We're running out of time, but how often have you seen that done well in organizations?
I'm not going to be out of work for quite some time, is what I'd say, Roddy. I see it brilliantly from individuals. I don't tend to see it lots organizationally.
And from an organizational perspective, is there something structurally that they could be doing better to enable it to happen more easily?
Yes.
Other than just bringing you in, of course.
Yeah, no, but bringing Ben and I in, it's absolutely fine. But no, but it's almost right. So I always have this thing in my head where somebody at the top of the organization says, my door is always open. Tell me what you're thinking. What's going on? And then when somebody does, they feel the full force of that coming back at them. And then they go, I'm never going to do that again. So words and pictures don't match. So if you genuinely want to, again, one of the golden rules is if you want someone to demonstrate a behavior, go there first. So some of the best leaders that I've worked with have not just said it, but demonstrated it. There was the managing director when I was at Barclays. He used to have a coffee morning for people in the business. And he used to just sit there, buy them bacon roll, 20 people, always booked up. So tell me, what do I need to know? What are the things that my direct reports, because, they don't want it to be career limiting.
Only good news travels upwards.
Only good news. What do I need to know? The changing culture that created was incredible. So, I'd say to all leaders, getting good at giving feedback is brilliant. Get really good at receiving it. How do I demonstrate that humility to get people to open up to me and tell me what I really need to hear? And then that will become reciprocal, and then they'll ask you, which makes the giving it much easier too.
And that sets that culture completely, doesn't it? If people see they're not having their heads bitten off for telling a little bit of truth to power, then that enables others to do so.
Congruency is key. Words and pictures need to match. The words are just words on a wall otherwise.
Fantastic. Martin, I can't believe we're almost up to an hour. It just buzzes past, but I've really, really enjoyed that. So when's the book out, by the way, or when's it?
Well, let's hope in 2026. Because
okay.
Once you've done one draft, you'll end up doing 4, and then
as a publisher, I know these things.
I'm hoping this year. But look out for a Martin le Comte, Ben Mooney. I'm sure I'll be posting it all over my own social media and stuff like that as well.
Tremendous. Excellent. Well, best of luck with that. And Martin, thank you so much for a fabulous conversation and sharing your insights and knowledge. It's been really appreciated.
Loved it. Thank you so much, Roddy.